the biggest game of the season is here. I believe this game is second this year in KenPom thrill score. Only behind this team playing another conference rival, Michigan and Illinois, is the highest game on that score rating. But Purdue, Michigan is the biggest game of the year so far for Purdue. It's happening this Tuesday in Mackey Arena, and this is a really really tough matchup. I'm gonna be straight up with you guys about it, and we'll get into the ins and outs of it. But this is a Michigan team that is the number one team in the country. They are historically good, analytically, and they're just really really dominant. They've been dominant all year. They've been dominant against highly rated teams, and this is a really really talented team. Where do you think Purdue has a chance to win? Kind of on the margins. Where do you see this matchup possibly going Purdue's way?
So you mentioned it. I mean, Michigan's the best team in the country analytically. They have been pretty much wire to wire this season. They were a preseason top 10 team, and then, I mean, they looked absolutely dominant in the non conference portion of the schedule. Maybe most famously, a 40-point win over a top 10 Gonzaga team that really put the whole country on notice like, oh, this Michigan team is different. And even though they did lose a home game to Wisconsin on one of the Badgers' best nights of the season, they've largely lived up to that billing the entire way. They're the only one-loss team in the power conference at this point, and uh, this is going to test everything Purdue has to try and even keep this game close, let alone pull out a win at the end. And uh, to that point, I think there's two sides to this because Michigan has an elite offense and an elite defense. We'll talk about the way Purdue can attack Michigan's defense a little bit later. I want to start with what Purdue needs to do defensively because I think that's the biggest challenge for Purdue, specifically Axel Lendeborg, who is undeniably Michigan's best player, leads them in points, rebounds, and steals. Averages 14 and a half points a game, almost 8 rebounds a game, and 3 assists as well. And he plays the 3 in the starting lineup for Michigan. Now he'll play the 4 as well, and they can even go small ball with him at the 5. But Michigan plays 2 true centers, a little bit like Purdue, but even more true centers than Treikoff and Wren. And they play Yaxel Lenneborg, who would be a 4 on most teams and a 5 on some at the 3. And that's going to be a pretty unique defensive challenge for Purdue to try and counter.
Yeah, I mean, this Michigan team has a unique ability to go super jumbo huge in a way that a lot of teams don't, and that includes Purdue because they just don't have quite the same size. It's just not many teams have an NBA first round draft pick level 4 playing the 3 for them, and it's a tough matchup. And I think it's why it makes a different player such an important matchup in this game. And I think we can start with that guy on the Michigan defense aspect, but for Purdue defensively, like I think this is just a really tough cover, and it's going to really test the defensive rebounding kind of improvements we've seen over the last 4 games or so, because this is a Michigan team that is dominant on everywhere almost, but they're especially dominant inside. They're a great offensive rebounding team, and if Purdue can limit them to one and done possessions, I think that gives you a chance to actually pick up and string together some stops, because we've seen this Michigan team, go cold offensively a little bit, and they aren't the most consistent team shooting the basketball. So I think the best chance to beat this Michigan team is turning it into a bit of a 3-point contest.
Yeah, Michigan is a very, very good rebounding team, particularly on the offensive end. Like Purdue, actually, they're a better offensive rebounding team than defensive rebounding team, and they really get out and they run a lot in transition. They punish teams on the glass. They have this unique combination of a ton of size and a ton of speed, which makes them an incredibly difficult cover. They're not quite like an Illinois or Michigan State that are also very big teams that play very slowly. Michigan really stresses your defense in multiple ways. They're top 30 in the country in average height, and even that's a little deceptive because they play 2 fairly small point guards in Elliot Cadeau and LJ Kaysen. outside of those two guys, they don't have a rotation player shorter than 6'4", and they can trot out Roddy Gale and Trey McKinney at the two guard spots, and they go 6'4", 6'5", 6'8", 6'10", 7'2". That's the Oklahoma City Thunder. Like, that's just massive NBA level athleticism at 5 spots with the size and the shooting to really pay that off. That I think is the single biggest challenge Purdue will face. We'll get into all the other things that Michigan can do. They're legitimately the best team in the country this season. So the list of things they can do well is long, but the specific combination of size, speed, and shooting that they provide means a lot of what Purdue wants to do defensively simply won't work, because you can't really help off of pretty much anyone on the floor at any time outside of the centers, because everyone else can shoot, and you can't really put like CJ Cox is going to have to play against Elliot Cadeau, but then who's Braden Smith going to be guarding? Namari Burnett's like 4 inches taller than he is. So there's some interesting challenges for Purdue defensively and trying to scheme around the size that Michigan has.
Yeah, I would say the one thing is that Gale is definitely not the best shooter. I think that's another guy you could sag off on. I think this is a game that like you probably don't see a ton of Roddy Gale if I was to guess. I think if you see a lot of Roddy Gale, I think it means Mackey's getting to some of the other guys on Michigan. I think in an ideal world for Michigan, yeah, you get like 30 good minutes Elliot Cadeau. You get a bunch of good Trey McKinney minutes. You get a bunch of good Namari Burnett minutes. But Elliot Cadeau is a guy that I think at times we've seen kind of lose his mind. LJ Kaysen can do that at times. Like he was the one guy who really wasn't able to keep his composure in the Michigan State game, I think was LJ Kaysen. And I think the moment got to him a little bit. So, if Mackey gets to guys like that, there's a world you see like 30 minutes of Roddy Gale. But in large part, I think that the way for Michigan to succeed is to not play a ton of Roddy Gale minutes because you want the shooting out there and you want to force Purdue to kind of go one-on-one with you inside and believe that like playing Yaxel at the 3, Mrez at the 4, Mara at the 5 is just too much size for Purdue to handle. And, I think this is one of the most exciting front court player matchups we've had this year. I'm really excited for Trey Kaufman-Renn and Mrez Johnson. The way that Trey Kaufman-Renn has been rebounding recently, like 2 of the best rebounders in the Big Ten, in my opinion. 2 also somewhat skilled offensive players. Like these are guys who aren't just rebounders, aren't just like, we're not just out there to be athletic and dominant inside for rebounds. Like these are guys who can score the basketball. Mrez has stepped out and made a few shots this year, not at a high volume, but has made a few. And Trey is obviously one of the best post scorers in the country, and Mrez has been a good interior defender. So I think that's a matchup I'm really, really excited for, and also one I think could be the key to this game. I think if Trey Kaufman-Renn gets the better of Mrez Johnson, you start to tip the scales slightly in Purdue's favor.
Yeah, so let's pivot to talking about the rotations Michigan's going to use a little bit, because you mentioned the matchup of Mrez on Trey Kaufman-Renn, and I do want to come back to that. But first, I wanted to highlight, like we talked a lot about the challenges Lendeborg is going to pose to Purdue, because you're going to have Fletcher Lawyer guarding him, at the tip, and that's not a matchup that should excite anyone on Purdue's sideline. But they only play about 9 minutes a game with all 3 bigs on the floor, which that could be a huge swing towards Michigan in those 9 minutes. But for the other 3 quarters of the game, they're going to be playing 2 bigs. They'll be playing Yaxel or Will Cheddar next to Johnson and Mara, one of those 2. So they'll play a little bit smaller and they'll get more shooting on the floor for sure. Lendeborg, for as much as he can do, is only a 30% 3-point shooter. If he's hitting those shots, Michigan's basically unguardable. But when he's not, their offense can get a little bit condensed, which is why they tend to take one of those bigs off the floor for most of the game. And that's going to provide a different challenge. And I think Johnson and Kaufman-Renn are going to be going head-to-head a lot. You mentioned how similar they are. Mrez is definitely a lot bouncier, more of an above-the-rim player, shot blocker, rim protector, lob threat than Trey, but Trey is a more talented post scorer for sure. He has a lot more moves, and he's more of a guy you can just get the ball to and let him go to work a little bit more than Mrez Johnson can, though he can do that as well. So that's definitely one of the matchups to circle in this game. I would also point to Ade Mara versus Oscar Clough is going to be a really interesting one to watch for a couple of reasons. But two of the most physical centers on the floor in the Big Ten. Mara definitely has the height advantage, though, which could pose Clough some problems.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Axel Fletcher, uh, matchup. I had to get a joke off. This could be a big game for the Fletcher Lawyer flopping abilities or offensive foul drawing abilities. If Fletcher's able to pick up a cheap offensive foul or two on Yaxel in that 9 minute stretch, I think Purdue suddenly looks at that 9 minute stretch. Even if you lose it by like 6 points, you look at that as, we'll take that. We'll take a, kind of picking up a foul and not getting killed in that stretch. But regardless, I think going on to that Mara Clough matchup, I think is interesting for a bit different of a reason to me than the TKR Merez matchup. I think the TKR Merez matchup is so interesting because it's two guys that for large stretches of the season have just been so consistently high level at what they do, and both two of the better bigs in the conference. I think with Clough and Mara, the interesting thing is these are two guys with high ceilings, but we've seen both of them be unplayable for stretches this season. And, in Mara's case, we've seen Mara be unplayable against similar personnel to Purdue in the past when he came to Mackey last year. I mean, Mara was nearly unplayable for UCLA in guarding ball screen coverage. And that was kind of what I was alluding to in the intro of this video was I think there's a world where like Purdue's able to play Mara off the floor in ball screen coverages. And I think if they're able to do that, that's really, really big in the grand scheme of this game because it really limits Michigan's ability to go three bigs if one of the three bigs is near unplayable on the defensive end. So that's a matchup I'm really interested to see. Sorry, excuse me. Just because I think we've seen Mara at times be this unicorn type big that's does all these special things and is this incredible player, but we've also seen him get played off the floor before. And I think there's two very different versions of Michigan, the one that has like 25 minutes of good a day Mara and the one that has 15 minutes of unplayable a day Mara. And they're two very different teams. And, unlike Merez Johnson, I think Ade Mara is a guy that has a history of putting out some unplayable performances. And so that's why that matchup is so intriguing to me.
I agree. I think that's going to be an interesting one. One of the reasons that Michigan is such a tough defense to dissect, we can kind of pivot now to Purdue's offense and how they're going to attack this Michigan defense. One of the reasons it's so difficult, and this is the best defense analytically in the country, one of the reasons it's so difficult to attack is because Merez Johnson and Yaxel Lindebor are incredibly versatile mobile defenders. This is not a team that plays three bigs that are a little statue-esque or they're sort of locked to the paint or anything like that. Like Merez can legit switch on a point guards and give a decent showing. Lindebor definitely can. Like those guys are NBA level switchable defenders, and that makes it really difficult to play them off the floor because you can't just trot out a shooter at that position and say, okay, now you got to guard on the perimeter because both of those guys can do that as well as guard in the paint. Mara, though, is a very traditional drop coverage, paint lock defender. He's an elite rim protector and an incredibly good at what he does there. But in terms of his, like, Michigan doesn't want him stepping out on the perimeter and trying to switch on ball screens and stuff. Now, attacking those kinds of players, there's typically two ways that teams traditionally will try and attack them. One is by having a pick and pop center, which Purdue doesn't really have, unless they want Daniel Jacobson teeing off from three. And if the key to Purdue beating Michigan is Daniel Jacobson making shots from outside, pack it in. The game's already lost. The other way, though, is by having a point guard that can attack in the mid-range and really punish drop coverage. And Purdue definitely has one of those. In fact, they have one of the best point guards in the country attacking drop coverage. This could be a big mid-range game for Braden Smith or even a pull-up three-point game, depending on whether, Michigan's going to go under or over those ball screens on the perimeter. Get Mara in drop coverage, get the ball in Braden's hands, and Mara is incredibly good at defending the rim and locking down the paint. So it might not be like a thing where he's getting backdoor cut and Daniel Jacobson's just wide open at the rim, but if Braden can start to attack that drop coverage and get his mid-range game off, it's going to force Michigan to play maybe a little bit less of Mara and Merez together on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, largely Michigan for the most part, when Mara is unplayable. Like, they just go to Yaxel at the 4 and Mrez at the 5, and that's still one of the best front court pairings in the entire country. The thing with that, though, that in Purdue's case specifically, that makes that such a big deal is that I think this Purdue team has the personnel to match up with a Yaxel Mrez lineup with those two at the 4 and the 5 and feel perfectly fine and not like there's a massive, massive mismatch somewhere. The issue with Michigan is that when they're playing Yaxel at the 3 with Mara playing well at the 5, it's just such a tough lineup for Purdue's personnel to match up with, given that they play three guards almost the entire game. But that's why that Mara matchup is so important to me, just because it kind of kills the unicornness of this Michigan team's lineup versatility, I think, and that's a big key to this game for Purdue. You mentioned Braden. I think like in all top 10 matchups, the best player on the floor is kind of the key for that team. Like I think this is a game where you have to get good Braden. I don't think you can really put it any other way. I don't think Purdue wins this game without getting not just good Braden, but possibly great Braden. Like it would take a lot for this Purdue team to win with just good Braden. And so that's going to be a really interesting thing and how he's able to get going because Michigan does have this, unique capability. We saw this earlier in the season against Maryland, albeit a very different Maryland team than Purdue. Maryland was playing with Michigan, and I mean, for as much as we've trashed Maryland before in the past, they were in a very tight game, and Diggy Coit was going crazy. I mean, he was couldn't miss, and Michigan stuck Yaxel on him for 94 feet, and he just completely took him out of the game. And I think, like you talked about the switchability, Yaxel can legit guard 1 through 5 for the entire 40 minutes of the game, and that's a scary proposition to have when that guy can play the 3 and just kind of roam around and guard whoever. I mean, it's a really really tough matchup, and he's a very very dangerous player.
Yeah, and Michigan is incredibly good at really every aspect of defense. This is not a team sheet that reached like, oh, this is where Michigan's gettable, right? Like they're really good at preventing 3-pointers and preventing a low percentage of on the 3-pointers that are attempted. This is not a game like Nebraska or even Illinois where Purdue shooters are going to be open and have to make shots. Like they'll get some. Like every team is going to give up an occasional corner 3, but this is not a game where you're expecting guys like Jack Benner and CJ Cox to hold the keys and knocking down open looks. Like that's not the kind of defense Michigan runs. They allow a lot of 2-point attempts, but they have the second best 2-point percentage defense in the country and the top 5 block rate in the country. Like they force teams off the 3-point line because they know they have size in the paint to erase guys at the rim. And that's what they do. And it's going to be an interesting challenge for Purdue because guys like Braden Smith and CJ Cox and Omar Meyer are quite comfortable taking 15 to 18 footers, right? And those pull up twos. Those are going to be the shots that Purdue gets in this game, I think, quite a bit. Trey Coffin Wren, like free throw line floater, that's probably going to be a consistently open shot because Michigan's going to let you take long twos long before they let you take a 3 or get to the rim uncontested. And there's a world where if Purdue starts missing some of those shots, this game could get pretty ugly quickly because those are the looks Purdue's going to be getting and trying to force 3-point attempts when Michigan's really trying to run you off the line just isn't a good recipe. But I don't know that I trust Purdue's bigs even to finish at the rim around Marat and Mrez.
Yeah, I mean they're a really really tough matchup for that reason. They're a special defensive team. They're so unique in everything they can do defensively, and not often do you see a team that is probably the best in the country at defending the rim while also being elite at defending the 3-point line. I mean, usually you kind of have to pick one or the other, but this Michigan team has the luxury of being elite at both. And it's a tall ask, and it's why the shot making of Braden, I think, is so front and center. One more thing before we move to predictions here. This is going to be a little bit of contrast in styles. This Michigan team plays at the 11th fastest pace in the country, in large part because of how fast they play offensively. They're the 7th shortest average possession length on offense. This team loves to run in transition. Purdue, by contrast, is the 294th team in pace. Something to watch is Braden Smith's ability to control the pace, I think. If Braden is able to slow this game down to a crawl, I think you see this Michigan offense get a little bit more inefficient. And come down to earth a little bit. I think because this team, when they get out and run in transition, is just so elite because of the size, the athleticism, and the speed that they have. You get Yaxel and Mraz running the floor with passers like Ademara, throwing full court passes the way he can, and Elliot Cadeau, the level passer he is in the open floor. Uh, you'll get a lot of lobs, a lot of fun plays for Michigan fans that would probably quiet the Mackey crowd down quite a bit. So I think that ability to control the tempo, allow that Purdue defense to get set, and give them the best chance to force a tough shot is important. But moving
On
into,
that note, real quick before we move
yeah, go ahead.
into predictions, that's going to be, I think, a really interesting case study for Purdue and how they approach this game stylistically. Because, like you mentioned, to get out and run, and Purdue's going to employ like the Alabama strategy of like, we're going to drag this game to a screeching halt and make you play on our terms and rely on our ability to out execute you in the half court. And that's not, I mean, Michigan can do that, but that's not how they want to play. But to stop Michigan in transition, you have to be making shots and getting back on defense. And Purdue is a top 20 offensive rebounding team in the country over the last couple of games, really since that losing streak ended. That's been a huge emphasis for Purdue is rebounding on both ends of the floor. And they're sending multiple bodies to the offensive glass. If you're grabbing those rebounds, that's great. Obviously, you're getting extra possessions for your team and getting more shots up. If you're not, if you're sending multiple guys to the glass and you're not grabbing those rebounds, and Mara has it with multiple guys leaking out in transition, that's when Michigan is at their most dangerous. That's when they can really run up the score too and go on those crazy runs where they hit a three on one end, swat a shot on the other, full court pass to an open dunk, and all of a sudden a 3-point game is an 8-point game and Purdue has to burn a timeout. So it'll be interesting to see what Matt Painter and this Purdue coaching staff emphasizes in this game. Are they going to play a little bit more passively and really focus on getting back on defense? Or are they going to say, you know what? We're not going to win if we play the way Michigan wants us to play. Let's crash the glass. Let's grab those boards to really put a lot of pressure on their bigs to avoid fouling on rebounds, grab ourselves extra possessions, provide a little insurance against maybe a slow shooting night.
Yeah, to that, I think one of the weakest parts of this Michigan team, as much as you'd call it weak, is their defensive rebounding. And they're an okay defensive rebounding team, but they are far from the best. They're definitely much closer to elite on the offensive side of the glass, and because they leak out in transition a little bit, like Yaxel's a guy who's become known for that, especially in Big Ten play, he's leaking out and having these highlight reel dunks, but it takes away a little bit of the rebounding edge that they have by playing that much size because you kind of hope that Ademara is the guy that brings down the rebound so that he can get the outlet pass. But with Purdue sending both Clough and TKR to the offensive glass, there could be some room for some offensive rebounds for Purdue. And if Purdue gets working on the offensive glass and dominates the glass in this game, I think that's another way that Purdue starts to feel really good about this matchup because if they do manage to dominate the glass in this game, I think the matchup starts to lean Purdue, like I said earlier. So on that note, I think that about does it for the preview. We should move into predictions. Ken Pum has this as a 78-76 loss for Purdue. 2 points. Pretty expected to be fun game. How do you see this going? I believe the betting lines are close for like 3.5 right now. How do you see this going? You think Michigan covers? Think Purdue covers? Where do you see this going?
I think at 3.5, I would take Purdue if I were a betting man. At 2, I'm probably taking Michigan. I think 3-point win for Michigan sounds about right to me. Look, Purdue will be able to attack Michigan. I mean, this is going to be the best offense Michigan has faced all season long. At the same time, I just don't think Purdue's defense really has any smoke for the Michigan offense at the end of the day. Like, Purdue's defense has been a top 12 unit in the month of February. But the best offense they've faced is Nebraska. And as good as Nebraska is offensively, they're not Michigan. So give me Michigan in a very close game. I'll say like 76-73. Because I think a 3-point game sounds about right. Mackey should be rocking. Purdue probably has the ball, the chance to tie it late and doesn't get a great look, would be my guess. I hope I'm wrong. This will be a fun one for sure. But this matchup makes me very uneasy. This is the best team. Both teams will have played all season so far. But Michigan's the better team analytically and on every poll for a reason. I think they're a more complete team. I think their size is going to be a major issue for Purdue. I think Purdue's offense could go through some rough stretches if Michigan's really able to put some size out on the floor and really bother Purdue's guards. I just see more ways Michigan can disrupt Purdue than vice versa.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you. I think this is a Michigan win. I'm leaning closer to like six, 6 points. I think this game is going to come down to Purdue is going to have to execute at a high level offensively the entire game. And I think that there ultimately will be a short stretch of this game where Purdue, maybe misses a few shots, maybe doesn't get quite the greatest looks as good a looks as they want, or even turns the ball over a couple of times. And I think that's the difference in this game is that Michigan's going to be at a high level for 40 minutes. And I don't know how much there is that Purdue can do to make this Michigan team uncomfortable. Just personnel wise, I think this Michigan team is an uber athletic, uber physical, huge squad that is just it's a really complete roster right now, and they're playing at a really high level. And I just don't know if Purdue has enough to disrupt that. I hope I'm wrong. I would love to watch a big time Purdue win over Michigan, but like you said, this is the best team that either team has seen all year pretty clearly. I think it's the best offense Michigan has seen. It's going to be probably by far the best defense Purdue has seen to this point in the year. Um, it'll be a really tough test for Purdue, and we'll be here to recap it regardless of if they win or lose. So be sure to tune in, and thanks for listening, everyone.